I used to be afraid of being present. I would drop into the now and feel it. The stillness, the beauty, the clarity. And then I'd freak out. Not because presence was scary, but because I thought it was. So I'd think my way out of it. And I didn't realise that it was my thinking about presence that scared me, not the presence itself. And because I didn't understand how I was creating my experience, I built a habit of scaring myself out of the very peace and presence and clarity that I was looking for. And thankfully, with some powerful mentors and insight, I started to wake up. And when you wake up, you realise something simple but world-changing, life-changing, that presence is where all your power lives, and not in overthinking and not in forcing things, but right here, right now. Presence, power, poise. And from this space, you're not just ready to respond to life. You're able to make proactive moves from clarity. And that's your ultimate leverage point, because from clarity you get freedom, and from freedom you stop waiting and you just fucking do what's required. And in absolute presence, there is no fear unless there's a real threat. Fear is psychological, a perspective, not a reality. And when you see that you're the one that's generating that, your fear, and that it's optional, you stop treating it like a truth. And in that moment, you get your bandwidth back. You create space, joy, movement, and magic. You're not afraid of being present. You just think you are. What I just read was a recent post I made, and something that landed deeply for me. And it came out of a moment recently when I was on tour where I saw something clearly that brought me straight back to the power of presence. Not just a concept and an idea, but in an embodied way. And today that's what I'm going to be exploring. So, welcome to the Groove Guru podcast. I'm Windsor, and today let's dive into something that's probably the most misunderstood and also most powerful state of all: presence. So, I remember earlier in my life, I would distinctly access this pure state of presence and then freak myself out and run away from it and get lost again. And you know, the first memory that comes to mind of that is when I was a baby, a few years old, and my mum, she would wash me in the morning, and I'd sit on top of the breakfast bar and look out the window and stare into the vast openness of life. And then I'd start to think things and get lost in the dream. And a few years later, I remember there was one time when I was a teen, I was playing one of my favourite computer games, The Secret of Monkey Island. And there was one night, it was a late night gaming session, I was playing the game and got to a point, I stopped and turned it off. And I remember just sitting in the stillness of the night and listening to the silence that was everywhere. And a lot of you know me for playing music, and when I play music and I'm in the moment and I'm listening to my music and not my mental noise about it, there's a sense of connection and deeper feeling that shows up, and a wisdom that guides the whole process and flows through. And what I'm really pointing to here is that we all feel presence in life, this natural state, and we have a habit of thinking ourselves away from it, even if we don't want to. Recently, another example, in the process of resolving my late father's estate, I had a day off on tour one day, and I had the chance to go to the spa, so I did that. And when I was there, my head cleared and I felt so relaxed. Not a lot of noise in here, and it was the most relaxed and peaceful I'd felt in quite a while. And then from that state of peace, I started thinking about estate-related stuff. And in a matter of seconds, I was in a state of panic. But then, fortunately, I got over myself and it was fine. Okay? And what I want to reveal here and point to and explore is what I've seen to be true about life, how it works from the inside out. And as I see it, at the heart of life, our experience is one of presence, the innate fabric of our experience at core, you could say. And that's what life is at the fundamental level, presence. And we also live in a world of thought. And if we think it, we feel it. Whoever you are, if you think it, you feel it. And that's happening all the time, all day, all night. As we're awake and as we dream, we're experiencing what our mind is doing, the power of thought. But most of us don't realise that consciously. I didn't. And I'm seeing more and more and more about it and waking up to the wonder and beauty of it. And when we wake up to that more and more, when we do, it changes things beyond what we can imagine. And again, I would think it would be the presence and that beauty, and that beautiful feeling of life that scared me, but it wasn't. It was my thinking about presence that was the only thing that could scare me. And when I saw that, that was huge. And, it's nothing when you don't understand how thought works, you'll keep thinking yourself out of your peace and clarity and presence, not knowing that you're doing that. And even if you do wake up to it, there'll still be moments that you think yourself out of presence. But with the awareness, you can always come back to it. And of course, it can be useful to think. Obviously, the intellect is a tool. We can plan things, we can learn things, we develop our vocabulary and communicate, etc. But like any other tool, we can use it wisely or unwisely. And when it comes to thought and our thinking, there's a lot of thinking that we do that's unhelpful and quite frankly, junk, okay? And when we wake up to how thoughts work in and let it flow through us and open to what's deeper and at the heart of life, we find the home of our presence. That's something that we always have access to wherever we are. Another way of saying this is that when it comes to peace and presence, we don't fear that. The only thing that we can fear is the unknown that it brings. And isn't it weird that the very thing that we crave, peace of mind, clarity, simplicity, is what we can run from the most? Not because it's dangerous, but because it's unfamiliar. And when I'm talking about presence here, I'm not talking about being passive and like staring at a wall and not doing anything. It's a space of pure clarity. It's our unhindered bandwidth psychologically. It's readiness. It's what your cool is. And as an analogy, when I'm fully present and behind the kit, for example, there's a flow, there's an intuition, a musical intuition, there's a natural precision that occurs. But then in the moments when I'm in my thinking and caught up, then everything tightens up, it's more awkward, and it doesn't flow as smoothly and gracefully at times. And it's the same with doing anything else. Like if you're talking with people or whatever you're doing, the more in your head and preoccupied that we are, the more that we get in our own way and overcomplicate things. But we can get out of our own way as well, which is very helpful. And one of the things that we have going for us is that it's built in a bit like an app, that we have a feeling that comes, whatever we think we feel. And the feeling that we have moment to moment, we can recognize that as a guide to our level of clarity in the moment and how helpful our psychological landscape is right now. And in karate, I was a black belt at 10 or 11 or something, and there's a phrase from karate that is, a tense muscle is a slow one. And it's the same with the mind. The level of tension that we feel psychologically it's an indication of our bandwidth, our psychological bandwidth in the moment, our mental horsepower, you could say, or however you want to say it. And the more tense we are up here, it's like the less bandwidth we have. And the more relaxed we are psychologically, the more bandwidth we have access to. And it's like a computer. If your computer memory is full and you've got too many windows and tabs open, it can slow the system down, and you have to free up some space and close some windows and tabs for it to work better and quicker. Okay. Now, what we're pointing to is realizing that space in that you are not your thoughts. You are that space of presence beneath the noise. And from presence, that's the space that you move and act from. And from there, in a way, you're unstoppable because there's nothing in your way psychologically. There's no story. There's no unhelpful noise. And that pure creative bandwidth, we have access to that. One thing that reflecting on this can appear to take us out of it, is what people call, triggers. Something triggers me, or I have this experience that comes up sometimes that I don't like. Pretty much is usually an experience. It's not a pleasant one, right? And you can recognize this in yourself, but you can also, when you listen to people, you can hear it in the language they use and the words they speak. If you listen to someone speak, you'll hear where they're triggered, and that's gold, especially if you're in the kind of work I do that helps point people away from that which is unhelpful and back into clarity and freedom and power. Because when you listen to people, you can hear them say things like, I feel this way because, I feel frustrated because of the traffic. I'm unhappy because I'm not making X amount more money than I think it should be, or I feel anxious or claustrophobic because there are so many people in here, etc. And what happens is, it's like when we experience the power of thought without awareness, that can be chaos and exhausting. And on the other hand, thought with more awareness, that's your access to clarity and pure creative power. Saying it another way, the triggers that we have, they don't come from life itself. They come from thought about life. Okay? Again, whatever we think you feel. If there's something in the past that is like a trigger for you, well, consider this: the past and the future, do they exist right now? The clue is in those last two words, right now. Right now is the only thing that exists. In the past and the future are hallucinations of thought. Okay? It's our idea about how things were or will be. But it's not true. It's just a made up flash in the pan, a noise in our head, if you will. And that's not to say that people haven't experienced things that are traumatic and painful. Of course, everyone's got their own version of that to some extent. But when you see in the moment that what's happening and apparent triggers are made of thought, the moment you see that and that it's optional to think into that, you're free. There's a phrase I love, that if you spot it, you got it. And what this also leads to is that whatever feeling and experience that you create in the moment, you don't need to fix that feeling. You just need to see where it's coming from. And with that recognition of thought, wow, this experience is coming from thought, it's an invitation back to the now. So any trigger that gets in the way of feeling present, instead of trigger, invitation to the heart of the moment, where all your bandwidth and presence is. Okay? So the more you do that, using your feelings as a guide to how clear you are, the more readily you can drop back into presence and come into the now fully and show up with what's showing up. So that's some of what can get in the way, but there can be more. And one of them is that I've alluded to, is that innocent misunderstanding of thought as being the truth about life, when in reality every thought that we create up is a story that, from this lens today, is a story that covers up our presence and can distract us from it. Okay? But when we see that thoughts in a way are not true, every thought is a lie, I've heard one of my mentors, Dickens, say, you come back to the truth and you can free yourself and get out of your own way. And, another thing is, a lot of people have this mental addiction to control. Like, I need all of these circumstances in my life to do this and be like this, or I need to have all these people be like this, or else I'm not okay, or I'm not enough. And we all have these stories and beliefs and things that we perpetuate, but that's just more thinking that we do that covers up the moment. And most of it's based on fear, which again is psychological and made up inner thinking and the mental movies that we play in our mind, all of which that we feel. And another thing is, when you over-identify with your character, your ego, self-preoccupation, based on, the notion of being a separate self, which, every human does to some extent. But the more thinking about me that I do, me, again, it's more distraction from the moment. And I'm not saying there's not thinking that makes sense to do, but recognizing when it's unhelpful and when you're thinking yourself into those states that you don't want, worry, anxiety, fear, panic, etc. You can free yourself from that, and that liberation and inner freedom is the name of the game that we're exploring here. And here's the thing, is even that we have all this mental noise that's going on, we can find a way to wake up, even when it seems unlikely. And a lot of you know me as a musician that goes on tour, etc. And tour life can be a really interesting metaphor for how the uncertainty of life can lead to stillness. Because, for example, when I'm on tour, or if you've ever been on tour or traveling with your work, that is something that throws you into quite unfamiliar environments, like, new cities, new countries, new venues, new people, and changing routines. There's uncertainty everywhere. And the beautiful thing about that is when you're surrounded by uncertainty, which I'm certain here is the essence of what life is, a sense of uncertainty, your system naturally drops back into presence. Well, why? Because it's when the world stops seeming so predictable, it's like the only stable place to best navigate it from is the now. And there's a wisdom inside us all that knows that. And we're all wired to show up in alignment with what's true and with actual reality. We work better that way. We're less stressed when we do that. Okay? And finishing that metaphor, that's why I tour with all the chaos and uncertainty that shows up often can invite, in my experience, some of the deepest clarity, because you can't hold on to control, and in a way you're not in control. Try controlling all of the things in the external world, that's not up to you. So when you let go of that mental addiction that we have to trying to control everything, you come back into your stillness, your clarity, and your power. So stillness, that is your power, and clarity, that is your edge, the very heart of your edge. And that presence, you could say, that's the real weapon. Okay? And when you start to embody this, and I say presence is like a weapon, but it can make you more of a peaceful warrior, let's just say, but prepared to do what's necessary. And when you start to show up, how does this look practically? Is that we have an experience of thought all the time. When we notice that our experience is coming from thought, we can see that we have some of that that's unhelpful and is noise. We let go of that and come back into presence in that infinite space of now, where we act from clarity, not panic. And another way of saying that is when we do what I've just explained, it's we get over ourselves. And that's the key, just learning to get over yourself. Because at your core, you don't need fixing. There's nothing wrong with you. My father would always say that to me, there's nothing wrong with you. But seriously, right now, hear that again. You don't need fixing. There's nothing wrong with you. Believing that is probably the biggest lie you've ever believed. And a lot of people have believed that and do believe that, but it's optional. What you want is freedom, and it's available. So presence is where the power is. It's where your power and your clarity really is. And it's where your real self is. Unfiltered, calm, and unshaken. And it's where you're free and clear to be at your best and respond to what shows up. And also, do what needs to be done from that clarity you have access to. And if you ever notice yourself, which is an invitation, if you notice yourself, which you will do at some point, is being caught up in your own thinking and then trying to think into things from that state, I invite you to come back into the now, a blank canvas, back to the drawing board, and think from there. Okay, we can always think again. And if you notice yourself getting caught up and think, you're kind of afraid of coming back into the now, remember, you're not afraid of being present. You just think you are. Let that sit. Breathe. Then go have fun. Get over yourself with love. Be here now and do what needs to be done. and I'll speak with you soon.